What happens when an officer with a superiority streak crosses paths with a woman whose authority outshines his in every meaningful way? It unfolded on a quiet Thursday evening just past 10:30 p.m., the kind of hour when the streets of Lincoln, Nebraska are mostly deserted, save for a night shift commuter, or someone like Major Camille Hunter driving home after concluding a strategy session nearly 90 miles away. She was in a standard-issue navy blue SUV, modestly tinted windows, no frills, just like her, efficient, focused, and unassuming. Camille had been driving for over an hour, lost in thought to the soft hum of her tires slicing through the dark highway. She wasn't speeding, swerving, or breaking any rules. But Officer Greg Dalton thought differently. Stationed off Westfield Avenue, he sat in his patrol car nursing stale coffee, thumbing through his phone, trying to stay awake. The night had been painfully slow. No incidents, no noise, until an unfamiliar vehicle appeared. He tossed the cup aside, shifted into gear, and pulled out. Before Camille even noticed the lights flashing in her rear view, it was already too late. She eased to the shoulder, composed and precise, just like she'd been trained to be. The slam of his car door broke the stillness. She tracked him in the side mirror. Tall, square-jawed, flashlight in one hand, the other resting near his sidearm. He skipped the passenger side and came straight to her window. "License and registration," he barked, offering no introduction. Camille kept her palms up, lowered the glass halfway. "Officer, could you tell me the reason for the stop?" Dalton narrowed his eyes, aiming the beam into hers. "You were weaving between lines. No signal. You looked impaired." Her expression didn't change. "I'm not," he repeated louder. "License and registration." She didn't push back. Calmly, she reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the paperwork. As she passed it over, she stated evenly, "This is a federal vehicle. I'm a government official." He glanced down at her ID, lips twitching. "Military?" "Yes." His smirk was barely restrained. "Doesn't make you special." "I never said it did." His voice hardened. "Step out of the car for me." Camille blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Step out of the vehicle." "I'm conducting a sobriety assessment." Her jaw tightened slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "On what basis?" "I've cooperated fully. I haven't been drinking. I'd like to understand the justification." Dalton stepped in closer. "So now you're refusing a lawful directive?" Camille didn't flinch. "No, I'm requesting clarity." That was enough to irk him. Without warning, he reached for the handle and opened her door himself. "I need you to exit the car. Now." That's when she, without raising her voice, tapped the camera icon on her phone and hit record. "Just so there's no confusion," she said, "this entire exchange is being documented." For the first time, his gaze shifted to the screen. There was a brief pause, a flicker of uncertainty, but he didn't step back. She emerged from the car, smooth and unshaken, her frame upright, calm, not confrontational, but unmistakably commanding. Even without the uniform, there was something about her stance that said she was no stranger to discipline. Dalton studied her, really saw her, and a question crept into the back of his mind. Who exactly am I dealing with? But pride spoke louder. He went ahead with the roadside test, having her walk a clean line under the buzzing glow of the street lamps, like she was just another late-night risk. She completed it flawlessly. Her steps were steady, her speech precise. No signs of impairment. Still, he handed her a citation for improper lane positioning. Camille accepted the slip in silence. She said nothing, only gave him a pointed glance before returning to her vehicle and continuing on into the night. What Dalton didn't realize was that the ticket would resurface in a courtroom and unravel more than just his assumptions. Officer Greg Dalton wasn't green. 16 years in the department had etched weathered grooves into his features and left deeper marks on his approach to power. He'd seen it all: hostile standoffs, chaotic collisions, family fights gone sideways. He was the type of cop whose name made cadets sit straighter and watch their words, and he thrived on it. He didn't entertain doubts, didn't invite pushback. His badge, to him, was a stamp of authority, absolute and unchallenged. Whether it was a sarcastic teen or a nervous driver questioning protocol, he'd clamp down hard, never relenting, never reflecting. At his station on Lincoln's west side, they knew who they had: a guy who punched in early, filed every report, and never hesitated to take charge. They also knew he had a temper, a clipped tone, and a habit of turning small sparks into flames. But no one had ever really stood up to him. Not until that night. When Dalton returned to the precinct after the stop, he barely gave it a second thought. He entered the citation into the system with his usual shorthand: failure to signal, slight lane deviation, possible signs of intoxication, no arrest, and tossed his body cam onto the dock like every other night. The footage remained untouched for 2 days before anyone even considered pulling it up. In the meantime, Dalton laughed about it over stale coffee. "Some lady tried to pull the federal card on me," he told Officer Ramos. "Waved her badge like it meant something." Ramos looked up from his desk. "Wait, you stopped a Fed?" Dalton shrugged. "That's what she claimed. Government vehicle, attitude, all that." "Name?" Dalton leaned back, tore open a snack bag and said, "Hunter? Camille? Hunter." The expression on Ramos's face changed subtly. "You mean Major Camille Hunter?" Dalton narrowed his eyes. "You know her. She gave a keynote at the State Academy last year," Ramos replied slowly. "She's not just military, she's command level. Strategic logistics out of Fort Harrison. 2 Bronze Stars, real deal." Dalton let out a scoff, brushing it off. "Doesn't matter who she is, in traffic I call the shots." But something about Ramos's tone stuck in his mind. Not fear, respect. A rare, unfamiliar weight that didn't sit right. Still, he didn't replay the footage, didn't question the citation. As far as he was concerned, it was routine and already in the rear view. What he didn't know was that Major Hunter had filed a formal complaint the very next morning, not only with internal oversight, but directly with the Office of Professional Responsibility. And she wasn't bluffing. Her own video had already made its way into the hands of her legal team, and an encrypted copy had begun circulating through military command channels. Dalton remained oblivious. He was back on his beat, handling petty calls, shouting through traffic stops, moving like someone who'd never been challenged. Because for over a decade, he hadn't been. The system had cushioned him. Captains had turned blind eyes. Union reps had quashed investigations. He'd convinced himself the rules bent differently for him. But now there was someone on the other side who wouldn't be intimidated. Someone who didn't raise her voice, didn't get rattled, didn't break. She followed the process, documented everything, made a single, well-timed call to the right office, and she had evidence. But Dalton never saw it coming, not until the envelope landed on his desk, stamped with the words, "Formal Inquiry." Camille Hunter wasn't the type to make noise for attention. She wasn't dramatic, wasn't reactive, and definitely didn't waste time chasing down every slight or mishandled situation. Not after over 2 decades in active duty with multiple overseas assignments and enough close brushes with danger to break most people. But this time was different. Because it wasn't just about her. It was about every young officer she'd mentored, every civilian she'd seen spoken down to with no one to defend them, and every woman, especially every black woman, who had bitten their tongue just to avoid escalation. She wasn't doing that anymore. At Fort Harrison the next morning, Camille sat at her desk, the screen glowing in front of her, sleep-deprived, but laser-focused. It wasn't just anger keeping her up. It was the loop playing over and over in her mind, the condescension in his voice, the way his hand hovered too long near his holster, the deliberate provocation. She recognized the script. She'd trained others on how to de-escalate it. She knew how quickly that moment could have spun out, camera or not. Her aide, Sergeant Fields, knocked lightly before stepping in. "You all right, ma'am?" Camille looked up, face steady. "No, but I've got it under control." He walked in fully and closed the door. "I watched the footage," he said quietly. "Should I bring in base legal?" "Already did," she replied. Fields paused, then asked, "You sure you want to take this further?" Camille leaned back in her chair. "I don't want exposure. I want accountability." And she meant every word. She'd built her entire career on order, precision, and principle. Her rank wasn't for show. It had been forged through difficult choices, dangerous missions, and decades of earned trust. She had led convoys through unstable regions, organized disaster relief after storms, protected lives, and managed logistics across 4 continents. But none of that mattered on that empty stretch of highway when a patrol car lit up behind her. To Dalton, she was just a woman in a vehicle who didn't comply fast enough. And what unsettled her most wasn't even how he treated her. It was how normal, how easy it seemed for him. So Camille made her calls. 1 to base legal, 1 to the Office of Oversight. She attached her video, filed the complaint. No exaggeration, no spin, just the facts, backed by visual proof. Within days, word started moving through military legal circles. It hadn't reached the public yet, but Dalton's name was now tied to an active internal review. The department's legal office had been formally alerted. And Camille? She stayed on task. She reported for duty. She said nothing unless asked. But she wasn't backing down. But behind the scenes, Camille was assembling something bigger. Her attorney had raised a point that went beyond bad judgment. The stop might have breached federal policy, considering her official clearance, the vehicle registration, and the absence of any real probable cause. And if it came down to it, they'd take it to court. Camille didn't hesitate. She was ready. Meanwhile, Dalton still thought it was all bark and no bite. That is, until the day he was served. The envelope wasn't thick, no bold lettering or dramatic warnings. Just a plain manila folder slipped under his windshield wiper with his name typed neatly across the front and a return address from Lancaster County Civil Court. He ripped it open standing outside the station, barely paying attention, assuming it was some internal memo or an old traffic summons. It wasn't. It was a court order. A formal civil rights lawsuit had been filed. The plaintiff, Major Camille Hunter. The allegations, infringement of constitutional rights during a roadside stop, including unlawful detention, intimidation, and excessive use of authority. Dalton stared at the letter, blinking hard. Then, with a dry laugh, he muttered, "You've got to be kidding me. Out here? Seriously?" But when he stepped back inside the precinct, the air had shifted. His captain, Lieutenant Grant, called him into the office. Door shut, blinds drawn. "Sit down," Grant said. "We need to go over something." Dalton folded his arms. "Let me guess, she's crying foul." Grant didn't smile. "You don't get it. She's not bluffing." "Do you even know who she is?" "Doesn't matter," Dalton snapped. "She got stopped, acted entitled, and now she's upset I didn't roll out a red carpet." Grant leaned forward. "She's not just another driver. She's a decorated officer, a senior military leader with decades of clean service, and she's got everything on video, from your cam and her own." Dalton rolled his eyes. "So what now? We beg forgiveness just because she's got rank? Number. But we sure as hell don't pretend it's going to disappear either. You're going to court. And if this hits the press, and it will, it's going to make waves." Dalton held on to his bravado, but his voice had thinned. "She wasn't arrested. I didn't lay a hand on her. I followed procedure." "You escalated it," Grant said flatly. "You profiled her before you had a single fact. You went in hot, and now it's going to cost you." For once, Dalton had no comeback. He bit down hard on the inside of his cheek. The summons listed a court appearance in less than a month. And within days, the station felt colder. Conversations quieted when he entered a room. Eyes followed him. No one said it, but he could sense it. He wasn't the dominant presence anymore. He was wounded, and the scent was in the air. Back at her post, Camille was preparing too, but not with microphones or statements. She wasn't looking to be a headline. She met with her legal team behind closed doors, reviewing the footage frame by frame, laying out every detail of her experience with clarity and precision. Camille was calm, poised, but resolute. Her attorney, Morgan Tate, sat across from her and asked, "You sure you want to take this all the way to court? It's going to be public. It'll follow you." Camille didn't hesitate. "Good," she said. "Let it." Tate hesitated. Most would have dropped it by now. Camille's voice was steady. "I've dropped too much already. This isn't just about me." She wasn't after compensation. What she wanted was a formal record, something permanent, something that could be pointed to, a declaration that position and power do not justify mistreatment, and silence isn't the only choice. She wasn't only standing up for herself. She was speaking for every person who had ever been belittled, brushed aside, or threatened under the shadow of a badge. And when the court date arrived, she didn't enter the room in silence. She walked in wearing her full dress uniform, medals, service ribbons, the insignia on her chest sharp and unmissable. She wanted the jury to see the full measure of who she was, not just a driver pulled over on a back road, but a citizen, a leader, a veteran who had honored the law and expected the same in return. Dalton was already seated when she walked in. He turned, spotted the uniform, and for the first time, the edge in his expression cracked. But the real moment hadn't started yet. When Camille Hunter was called to testify, the entire courtroom leaned in. The gallery was full, not with press, at least not yet, but with law enforcement from both the Lincoln precinct and officers from Fort Harrison, quietly present in uniform or formal civilian clothes, seated beside community members who barely grasped the weight of the case. To some, it was a traffic misunderstanding. To Camille, it was the culmination of years of unspoken pressure and daily restraint. Dalton sat beside his lawyer, Marcus Bell, rigid in his chair, his face a mask of stone. Bell leaned in, whispered something. Dalton didn't respond. He just kept his gaze fixed forward. Then Camille was sworn in. She stood, adjusted the collar of her jacket, and walked toward the witness box, with the same composure she'd used leading missions through volatile zones. She didn't falter, didn't glance around. Her movements were deliberate. Her presence commanded the space. Her ribbons caught the courtroom light. Her stance demanded recognition, not because of her uniform, but because of her character. The judge cleared his throat. "Major Hunter, thank you for your service. You may proceed." Morgan Tate approached the bench without hesitation. "Major, could you walk us through what happened the night of December 14th? Camille spoke with clarity. "I was returning from a briefing at the Indiana State Defense Force around 11:15 that night. Officer Dalton pulled me over. I wasn't speeding, swerving, or displaying any signs of impairment. I complied with every instruction. I asked reasonable questions. His response was aggressive. Her voice didn't waver, not sharp, just steady and honest. He ordered me out of the vehicle without giving a reason. When I asked for clarification, he repeated the order more forcefully. That's when I activated my phone to document the remainder of the encounter." Tate nodded. "Did you refuse any lawful commands? Number, did you resist at any point? Number, did you make your identity clear?" "Yes. I told him I was a federal officer and that I was operating a government-issued vehicle." The room stayed hushed. No coughs, no movement, just her voice and the quiet scratching of pens moving across notepads. Then the video played. First, Camille's phone recording. Steady, crisp, undeniable. Then came Dalton's own body cam footage. The courtroom watched his tone, his stance, the way his hand hovered by his holster, despite her calm demeanor. The unnecessary field sobriety test. The dismissive look when she passed it without hesitation. The jury didn't speak, but you could feel the shift in the atmosphere, like the oxygen had changed. Then came the cross-examination. Bell approached with the practiced politeness of a man trying to disarm, not attack. "Major Hunter, with all due respect, could it be that Officer Dalton was simply following procedure?" Camille's gaze didn't flicker. "Number, is it possible he was acting out of concern for your safety or that of others? I was driving within the lines. I was sober. I was respectful. There was no threat. And yet you recorded the interaction. Why?" "Because I've lived long enough to know silence doesn't protect you. I wanted a factual account of what occurred." Bell nodded slowly. "So you're saying officers shouldn't be allowed discretion?" Camille looked him in the eye. "I believe discretion must be exercised with discipline. That badge doesn't grant power. It carries responsibility." That answer landed hard. Even the judge paused, shifting slightly in his chair before continuing. Then it was Dalton's turn, not to testify, but to sit and watch as the footage rolled again. This time, slowed down. Every clipped command. Every time he looked at her like she didn't belong. The prosecutor stepped in. "Officer Dalton, why did you order her out of the vehicle?" Dalton's shoulders tightened. She looked evasive. "Did she fail to comply with your instructions?" She questioned them. "Is that unlawful?" A pause. Number. Did she yell, threaten, or show aggression? Number. Then what prompted the escalation? Silence. "Officer Dalton, were you aware that Major Hunter was a ranking military official at the time?" Number. "And had you known?" His voice dropped, almost swallowed. "I probably would have approached it differently." The courtroom fell silent again, but this time the weight of it was unmistakable. There it was, truth, or at least the sliver of it that slipped out. Not remorse, just a moment of unintended honesty. Dalton hadn't seen a human being that night. He'd seen someone who didn't conform fast enough, didn't speak on his terms, didn't bow. And now, sitting across from Camille with her uniform and record in full view, the courtroom saw it too. But the trial wasn't done, not yet. The final question still hung in the air. What does accountability actually look like? 3 days passed before the verdict came down. This time the courthouse was quieter. No uniforms, no quiet ranks of officers watching from the back row. Just Camille, her counsel, and a few civilians curious enough to return for the conclusion. Dalton sat stiff beside his lawyer, hands locked, face neutral, but his jaw tensed, like he was grinding his teeth without realizing it. Judge Elena Martinez flipped through the papers in front of her, then looked out over the room. "In the matter of Hunter vs. Dalton," she began, "the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff." Dalton shifted in his seat. Camille didn't move. The court recognizes a violation of the plaintiff's constitutional protections during an unlawful traffic stop and detainment. Furthermore, the court finds that the conduct of Officer Dalton fell outside accepted department policy and failed to meet the standard of professional behavior. No one applauded. No dramatic reactions. Just the sharp silence that only consequence can create. Dalton's attorney leaned in. "We'll appeal," he whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Judge Martinez continued. "While no criminal charges are being pursued at this time, the plaintiff is awarded compensatory damages totaling $35,000. This ruling will be entered into public record and forwarded to both the Department of Justice and the Lincoln Police Department for further internal review." Camille didn't celebrate. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, once. Not to the jury, not to the judge, but to herself. She had done what she came to do. Outside, Dalton paced near the courthouse steps, glancing around as a few local reporters began gathering. Not a media swarm, just enough cameras to make him lower his head and shield his face with a file folder as the shutters clicked. He gave no statement. He just walked off, got in his car, and disappeared. Camille paused in the hallway, pulled out her phone, and read the message. "Verdict in your favor. Case closed." Her attorney caught up to her. "You know, you could have gone for more." Camille shook her head. "It was never about the money." Morgan studied her a moment. "Do you think it'll actually change anything?" Camille turned toward the glass doors and said, "I don't know, but maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice." A week later, Dalton was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Rumors swirled. Some said he might be quietly reassigned. Others whispered this was the slow unraveling of a career built on unchecked authority. Either way, the veneer of immunity that had once surrounded him was now fractured, and no one could pretend not to notice. Back at Fort Harrison, Camille resumed her duties without fanfare. She didn't chase headlines or pose for interviews. She had teams to lead, operations to coordinate, and young soldiers to prepare. But within the ranks, her example echoed louder than any speech. Respect doesn't always require a raised voice. Strength isn't always loud. And sometimes the most powerful statement is the one delivered with composure. Still, even with the verdict behind her, Camille understood the larger battle hadn't ended. Because real accountability isn't just about consequences. it's about what happens after. 2 months later, she stood in front of a fresh class of recruits, faces barely out of adolescence, eyes filled with purpose, minds still shaping their sense of duty. She wasn't there to discuss tactics or protocol. Today was about integrity, leadership in the quiet moments. She scanned the room and asked simply, "How many of you believe wearing this uniform automatically earns you respect?" A few hands rose, some tentative, some certain. She gave a small nod. "I get that instinct. But here's the truth. Respect isn't something you're entitled to. It's something you earn with every decision, every day." She let that sit in the room. "Same goes for authority," she added. "The rank, the badge, the title. They're not armor. They're responsibility. And if you can't carry that weight with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all." Toward the back, one of the youngest leaned in, listening hard. Camille let her gaze sweep the room before continuing. "I was pulled over once by an officer who forgot that. I could have shouted. I could have panicked. I could have ignored it. But I didn't. I documented it. I filed the complaint. I showed up to court and I spoke the truth." She paused. "He didn't see my service. He only saw someone he thought wouldn't push back. But when he saw my rank, not just on my uniform, but in my actions, he realized he'd misjudged. That's the difference. That's leadership." The room remained silent, but not the kind born from boredom. It was the silence that settles when something hits home. Camille closed the folder on the podium and lifted her gaze. "Lead with character. Serve with integrity. And never forget this. When you wear this uniform, you don't just represent yourself. You carry the weight of those who served before you and the responsibility to set the standard for those who will come after." She stepped down from the platform, not for applause, not for recognition, but because the message had been delivered. The work in that moment was done. Let this serve as a reminder. Authority without accountability is nothing more than a mask worn by the insecure. Speak with conviction. Stand your ground. And when you witness injustice, do not look away. Because silence shelters the guilty. But courage? Courage defends us all.